The central theme of this chapter is about how a child's developmental trajectory is heavily shaped by the early parent-child relationship. And when I say developmental trajectory, I mean how it relates to the core domains of social, emotional, and cognitive development. The main father of this body of research is John Bowlby, who put forward attachment theory, and Mary Ainsworth, who played a significant role in advancing and refining it. Bowlby himself grew up in an upper-class British household where he was raised by a nanny and barely saw his mother, and he was sent off to boarding school at the age of 7. Bowlby's research stemmed from his desire to understand why young children in residential nurseries expressed anger and distress when separated from their mothers, despite having all their physical needs met by staff. The prevailing consensus at the time was that a child was utmost concerned with who could provide them with food and physical safety, and that a child should be able to thrive in any relationship that met those needs. In contrast to this, Bowlby concluded that a strong emotional tie to a specific person that promotes the young child's sense of security is instrumental. This insight initiated a wave of reform, so much so that the visitation rules of many health institutions were reformed to allow patients to stay with their children, and moving forward, it became a central concept in developmental understanding. The next topic I was going to talk about was functions of attachment, which include providing a sense of security. And by that, I mean maintaining a sense of psychological equilibrium. A disruption of equilibrium is manifested through an infant exhibiting distress, anxiety, crying, and wanting to move closer to the mother, who then soothes the infant with her voice and picks them up to restore that equilibrium. The next function is to regulate affect and arousal. Affect refers to the underlying experience of feeling, emotion, or mood, which includes physiological reactions such as increased heartbeat and tension. The affective regulation provided by the mother enables the child to learn how to self-regulate by internalizing the methods of regulation. Promoting the expression of feelings and communication. The relational container the infant experiences with their mother serves as the building block for mutuality and adopting a mutual frame of reference with other people. Mutuality refers to the capacity to engage in a back and forth with another being when it comes to feelings and communication. The last function is serving as a base for exploration. The infant can dive deeper into the experience of entertaining their curiosity, of making sense of their surroundings, and of the world at large when they believe they have a secure base to return to. The next subject I wanted to focus on is an illuminating study on attachment that involves geese. In particular, I would like to talk about the work of another important figure in the area of attachment, an ornithologist named Konrad Lorenz. An ornithologist is someone who studies birds, and Lorenz studied gray-lag geese. I found this relevant because I believe it confirms Bowlby's conclusion and serves as validation that attachment is innate and programmed genetically, and that it prioritizes attachment to any caregiver over attachment to a caregiver that is able to fulfill our needs. What he noticed with these geese was that mere minutes after hatching, they established an attachment to their mother, making sure to maintain close physical proximity to her. This observation was a driving force behind the development of what has been referred to as the imprinting principle, which says that these geese would imprint on the first suitable moving stimulus they saw within a critical period between 13 to 16 hours shortly after hatching. This discovery contradicted the long-held notion that these birds were incapable of attaching to anything besides their mother. What he demonstrated was that they aren't able to differentiate between who they should form an attachment to. It could be the mother, but at the same time, it could be a farmer who just happened to be standing around when they hatched, or a tractor even. By placing certain objects in front of these newly hatched birds, he recorded footage of them developing powerful attachments to bicycles, tires, mannequins, garden hoses, and farmers in boots. His research ultimately was used to draw a parallel between these birds and humans, and to point to our hardwired proclivity for finding and attaching to caregivers who may not even remotely be fitting or accommodating of us, but rather simply to the adults who are closest in proximity to the child in the early phases. And also, rather like birds, human infants are unable to distinguish very well between which caregivers to attach to, and may attach to someone who is about as useful to their needs as a tractor is to a goose. And this is ultimately reflective of how it is such a viciously primordial motivation to find an attachment figure.
Okay, so I'm going to be covering the infant development process. This is mainly a summary of Davies chapter 5. So in this presentation, I want to cover three main themes that you're going to be seeing in the infant development process. So the first one is the idea of experience/stimulation. So infant brains are not wired to develop independently. They require a caregiver to provide stimulation in the form of physical touch, empathic response, attention, nutrition even, in order for their neural networks to strengthen and or prune away. So the use it or lose it phenomenon is very strong here. The second key theme is the idea of response. So infants will experience stimuli and respond, usually either through very basic affects initially, like smiling, cooing, blank staring, or crying, or just expressing discomfort. And eventually that response will become full-blown language and communication once they are older. And the third theme is habituation/learning. So at a certain point, infants learn to associate certain stimuli with certain experiences. So for instance, they become disinterested in certain toys once they played around with it. They know that when a caregiver returns home, they expect to be fed. All those things the infant internalizes into their working models of the world. Okay, so what I really liked in the Davies chapter is the metaphor of the master and the apprentice, right? So they said, quote, "The apprentice learns the trade because the master provides protected opportunities to practice selected subtasks, monitors growth of the apprentice's skills, and gradually presents more difficult tasks," right? So a lot of the people that we become is we're receiving training from our parents or primary caregivers, guardians, in terms of how we're supposed to operate in the world. And this can either turn out very well or very poorly. Right, so jumping right into the stages of the developmental period, I'm going to go off of the four main stages that Davies introduced. But the actual names of these periods aren't in the textbook. They're just things that I came up with that I felt adequately summarized what is really happening in those periods. So the first is the exploratory period from 0 to 4 weeks of life. So in this period, the baby enters the world and is very eager to learn. They're taking in all these different stimuli and experiences and responding based on simply how it makes them feel. They learn how their bodies move, they cry and make noises for the first time, even though they don't really understand it, right? And one of the most amazing things is they learn to habituate really quickly. So I think there was an experiment where they shone a light onto a sleeping baby, and initially they respond, but then the more they shine the light onto the baby, they sort of kind of ignore it, right? And so this ability to habituate feeds into later developments of emotional regulation when the baby gets older. And some babies are really hypersensitive to stimuli and others are not as responsive. And it all depends on the caregiver at this point to recognize where on the spectrum their baby lands and respond accordingly. Okay, so the second period is, I like to call it the emotional regulation period. So from 1 to 3 months of life. So according to Rosenblum et al. 2009 in the Davies textbook, infants have two main developmental goals between the 1 to 3 month period: to develop a basic capacity for self-regulation and to become oriented to the external world, particularly the human world represented by caregivers. So the HPA axis, which regulates stress, becomes less reactive and more organized as parents buffer their infant stress. The baby learns different tactics for staying calm, like sucking on their thumb or just looking around at novel things. As the central nervous system continues to develop, the baby also starts to master their emotional states. They're less fussy, they have an increased attention span, and they learn how to wait. They also start understanding that other people have emotions too, right? And they can recognize it in faces and begin interacting with their caregivers on an intentional level. And one of my favorite, developmental experiments is the one where the mom is, playing with the baby, making faces, the baby's really happy, and then the mom suddenly changes their face to just a cold stare, and the baby doesn't know how to respond to that because they're so uh, unused to their caregiver being this way. So that demonstrates that the babies are able to recognize affect in facial expressions. They understand that something has gone wrong within their mental model of understanding. So they're cognizant of what is being shown to them. It's not aligning with what they're understanding, and it shows that they're aware and conscious of what they're looking at. The third period is the play period, so from 3 to 6 months. So from months 3 to 6, the baby begins to formulate comfortable attachments with their caregivers and the social networks that they're exposed to. So whether it's their grandparents or aunts, uncles, or just friends of the parents, within these relationships, they learn to interact in the form of play, which is their first foray into communication. So most of this play initially is parent initiated, where the baby might be given a toy and they interact with it, hit it or shake it. There's also vocal play where they're just heard in their cribs trying to make different noises, and they're just enjoying the experience for its own sake and trying to gain a mastery of their vocal cords, their tongue, all that. And soon the baby begins to initiate play on their own through vocalizations or by gesturing towards objects that they want. So this demonstrates that they're developing a greater understanding of intentionality and the idea that they have influence over the environment around them. All right, and finally, the last period that Davies covers is the cognitive period, so from 6 to 12 months. So in this 6-month period, the baby's development explodes physically and mentally. So physically, they can support their own torso and head more effectively, which allows them to earn different views in front and around them. They start crawling and attempting to stand up, eager to master their bodies to learn more about their environment. And mentally, they're developing mental models of the world. They're building up memory. They become more acquainted with the physics of the world, with the idea of object permanence, where before, if an object disappeared, it was out of sight, out of mind. But now they recognize that if it's covered with like a blanket, they understand that it's still there and they start looking for it. They also begin to understand that other people have minds too, and they start demonstrating joint attention, where if their caregiver is looking at something, they also look towards that direction. Social referencing, so being able to read people's emotions in response to things. And they give directions. They ask for, they gesture towards things. They know how to take directions. Essentially understanding that what they put out into the world receives a response. And they also understand that they exist on their own, in a sense that other people can also have the capacity to give stimuli and receive responses. And in this sense, the greatest triumph here is that they develop a sense of self, right? They start to communicate what they want, which they recognize as a desire. They understand cues of encouragement when they try to accomplish a task. And that in turn builds up self-esteem and self-efficacy. Right, so the main takeaways from all of this is that infants are born into this world with so much potential, right? It's incredible how our brains and genetic code are primed to take on these new experiences and stimuli and learn from them. But without the adequate care, attention, and support from caregivers, we're at risk of falling into maladaptive patterns of behavior, attachment, and emotional regulation.
Hello, everybody. In my portion of our presentation, I would like to take a closer look at the social worker's role when we are tasked with helping support an infant and their family. Hopefully, you all have read the study by Tomasello, Manning, and Dumas pertaining to the use of a family-centered approach. In the study, we see that Part C of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act firmly stresses this family-centered approach when outlining federally supported early intervention services for infants and toddlers with disabilities. We see how it encourages the use of an IFSP, or an individualized family service plan, counter to how it was done in the past, where it was more of the individual service plan for the child, without really taking into account at this level the family dynamic with the child. The study does make it clear that there are still substantial barriers limiting the use of family-centered interventions being used with each and every family that receives services. I would argue, and I would say this study, of course, argues as well, that the social worker is in a prime position to use their unique skill set to ensure a family-centered approach, not only from the social work side of things, but also from the perspective of doctors and nurses and health professionals. I think this will become clearer as we keep going here. The main argument offered for a family-centered approach I have quoted here, highlighting some of the important phrases. So it is true that not all disabilities with youth have a negative impact on families, but many families do indeed experience great physical and psychological stress. Parents, siblings, other family members, they could be at an increased risk for depression. They could have a reduced quality of life. All these things take their toll. Accordingly, children with disabilities have special needs, of course, but their families do as well. And as social workers, we have to really understand that and kind of attack the situation from that perspective. Whether it's financial, social, psychological, or other support services, we have to have the wherewithal to be able to offer support, ideas, resources for families as they kind of navigate the reality of having a child with disabilities. Of course, the way that social workers have to be with their clients, they have to be with them as a partner. And it's only through that partnership with the family that they can better understand and better meet the diverse needs of the families in front of them. For families, just like with our other clients, individuals or couples, we really need to understand and to empathize with them better in order to help them better. It's very true that each child is different. If you've seen children, you can see that clearly, but it's also true that each family is different. So to be able to understand the dynamics of one family, you have to really enter into that family and to really get to know the people involved. Personally, reading this hit really close to home for me. My youngest niece has a developmental disorder, and I have really seen firsthand the toll it has taken on my sister, on my brother-in-law, my parents, the grandparents, aunts and uncles. The whole family really is involved in my situation, at least. So to see that this is being stressed, that the whole family deserves care and attention, and to be heard, to be seen, really meant something to me with my experience. So here are the pillars of the FCC, the family-centered care. Of course, family-centered, the center is the family. The entire family, not just the child with special needs. Things have to be weighed. Things have to be looked at from all angles. We believe that the decision-making force is the family. The social worker can have ideas, as we said, or they can have thoughts, resources, but it really has to be a decision made by the family in order for them to really identify with it and undertake whatever is decided. We should come from a strengths perspective. We have to believe that we can set families up to succeed and see what they're good at, see the ways that they've been, see the ways that they want to change, perhaps, and to really set them up for success. Something we do with, again, all our clients. This is a perfect niche kind of area for us. Providers should think of themselves as facilitators and collaborators, not experts whose top-down approach needs to be followed. It has to be something that comes, again, from the family, something that they can grasp onto. Just like we think all of our clients are the experts on themselves, in the same way, when we think about the family is an expert about themselves and about their children. So we just have to make sure that we let them know, we let parents know that we think that they have their child's interest in mind when they make decisions, and that we are trying to help them make their choices with their situation that only they really know fully.